"Sir, I paid too much for this seat to sit next to that." Richard Whitmore didn't lower his voice when he said it. He wanted the entire first-class cabin to hear him. And they did. At 8:14 p.m. aboard Crown Atlantic Flight 908 from New York to Dubai, the temperature inside the luxury cabin seemed to drop all at once. Crystal glasses trembled softly against polished tray tables. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the hum of the overhead air sounded sharper now. Monica Hayes stood motionless beside seat 1A, one hand resting lightly on the leather headrest. Black hoodie, dark jeans, white sneakers, no jewelry, no designer luggage, no visible sign that the woman standing quietly in the aisle owned more aviation stock than half the people on Wall Street combined. But Richard Whitmore didn't see any of that. The white billionaire hedge fund manager only saw a black woman he believed didn't belong near him. "There has to be some mistake," he continued, adjusting his tailored silver cufflinks. "I requested privacy." Beside him, flight attendant Ashley Monroe forced a tight smile that barely concealed her agreement. "Let me take a look at your boarding pass, ma'am," she said, though Monica had already scanned successfully at the gate 10 minutes earlier. Monica handed it over calmly. Her face revealed nothing. That stillness unsettled people more than anger ever could. Ashley glanced at the pass, then looked back at Monica's clothes again. "Seat 1A?" she asked carefully. "That's correct," Monica replied. Richard laughed under his breath. "Interesting." Across the aisle, a middle-aged woman lowered her champagne flute slowly. A younger passenger near the window subtly reached for his phone. The cabin wasn't quiet anymore. It was watching. Monica had seen this before. At 26, during a tech conference in Zurich, security stopped her outside a hotel ballroom and asked if she was catering staff. At 31, a private investor once handed her his empty coffee cup before realizing she was the keynote speaker. Different cities, different faces. Same pause before disrespect. Ashley leaned slightly closer now, lowering her voice just enough to sound polite while still humiliating her publicly. "Mr. Whitmore is one of our priority travelers. Perhaps we can relocate you to business class with compensation." Monica blinked once. "Or," she said evenly, "you could let me sit in the seat I purchased." Richard scoffed loudly. "Purchased?" A few uncomfortable chuckles escaped from nearby seats. He leaned back like a king observing entertainment. "Look," he said, "people sneak into premium cabins all the time. We both know how this works." Monica slowly turned toward him. Her eyes were calm, but something inside them had sharpened. "No," she replied softly. "We don't." The silence afterward felt heavy enough to crack glass. Ashley shifted awkwardly. "Ma'am, we're simply trying to avoid conflict before departure." But the conflict had already arrived. It had arrived the second Richard decided comfort only belonged to people who looked like him. 3 rows back, a little black girl stared at Monica wide-eyed from beside her mother. The child looked confused, nervous, like she was learning something painful in real time. Monica noticed her immediately, and for just half a second, something flickered across her face. Not fear, recognition. Then Richard delivered the sentence that changed the entire flight. "If she stays," he snapped toward Ashley, "I'm not flying on this aircraft." And somewhere beyond the cockpit door, before anyone inside first class realized it yet, a pilot had just received the updated passenger manifest with one specific name highlighted in red: Monica Hayes. The moment Richard Whitmore said he would not fly beside her, the first-class cabin stopped feeling like a cabin and started feeling like a courtroom. Every eye drifted toward Monica Hayes now. Some curious, some uncomfortable, some already convinced she was the problem. Monica lowered herself slowly into seat 1A without another word. Calm, controlled, almost impossibly calm. The Italian leather beneath her creaked softly as she settled in beside the billionaire who had just tried to remove her from the flight. Richard stared at her in disbelief. He clearly wasn't used to resistance delivered this quietly. Men like Richard built their entire identities around the assumption that money controlled every room. And for most of his life, it had. He owned luxury hotels across Europe, a private island near Sardinia. 3 financial news networks treated his opinions like economic prophecy. Entire companies trembled when he shifted investments. But Monica's silence disturbed him more than shouting would have. Because silence meant she wasn't intimidated. Ashley Monroe forced another professional smile as other passengers awkwardly pretended not to listen. "Ma'am," she said carefully, "perhaps we can make this easier for everyone." Monica looked up at her. Easier for who? Ashley hesitated, just for a second, but that second exposed everything. Richard leaned back smugly, crossing one polished shoe over the other. "You know," he muttered loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear, "wealth used to come with standards." A few passengers shifted uncomfortably. One older man frowned but stayed silent. Another woman stared down at her phone, pretending the humiliation unfolding 3 feet away had nothing to do with her. That was the thing about public cruelty. Most people recognized it immediately. Few interrupted it. Monica folded her hands in her lap. Her hoodie sleeves covered most of her wrists. No Rolex. No diamonds. No visible armor. She looked more like a tired traveler than one of the most powerful women in global aviation. And Richard mistook simplicity for weakness. He smiled coldly. First class isn't a social experiment. Ashley let out an uneasy laugh before immediately regretting it. Monica noticed. So did everyone else. Across the aisle, a young man subtly tilted his phone camera higher. Recording now. The cabin lights reflected faintly against his screen. Monica saw that too. But her expression never changed. Years ago, moments like this used to make her angry. Then came exhaustion. Then discipline. Then something more dangerous than either. Control. Her mother once told her, "The moment people decide who you are before hearing your voice, never give them the satisfaction of losing yours." Monica learned that lesson at 11 years old, standing inside another airport beside another first-class counter while strangers questioned whether her family belonged there. Some wounds didn't disappear with success. They just learned how to sit quietly inside expensive rooms. Ashley cleared her throat. "Mr. Whitmore is simply concerned about his travel experience." Monica finally turned toward Richard fully now. "No," she said softly. "He's concerned about proximity." The sentence landed like a blade wrapped in velvet. Richard's jaw tightened instantly. For the first time since boarding, he looked irritated instead of amused. "Do you know who I am?" he asked. Monica held his stare. A man terrified that respect can't be purchased. The air vanished from the cabin. Even the woman pouring champagne near the galley froze mid-motion. Richard's face darkened crimson. "Unbelievable," he snapped. "Ashley, either she moves, or I call corporate myself." Ashley reached for the intercom phone beside the galley wall. But before she could press a single button, the cockpit door suddenly opened. And the expression on the pilot's face made the entire first-class cabin go silent. Captain Daniel Brooks had flown diplomats, celebrities, foreign presidents, and once even a grieving royal family through a thunderstorm over the Atlantic without panicking. But the moment he saw the name Monica Hayes highlighted on the updated manifest, his stomach dropped harder than turbulence ever could. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered under his breath inside the cockpit. Beside him, the co-pilot frowned. "What?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. He stared at the screen another second, making sure he was reading it correctly. Seat 1A. Monica Hayes, founder and majority owner of Crown Atlantic Airways. The woman whose aviation software had saved the company from collapse 6 years earlier. The woman employees quietly called the ghost owner because she almost never appeared publicly. Daniel looked toward the closed cockpit door as muffled arguing echoed faintly through the cabin. Then he unbuckled his harness immediately. "Keep the boarding hold active," he said. "We're not pushing back yet." Back in first class, Richard Whitmore had no idea the balance of power had already started shifting behind the scenes. He only knew Monica still hadn't moved, and that infuriated him. "This is absurd," he snapped loudly. "I spend 8 figures annually with this airline." Ashley nodded nervously. "We understand, Mr. Whitmore." Monica sat perfectly still beside the window, gaze resting calmly on the dark tarmac outside. Manhattan lights shimmered across the rain-speckled glass. The runway looked like liquid gold beneath the storm clouds. Yet inside the cabin, everything felt colder now, more fragile. Richard leaned toward Ashley again, lowering his voice just enough to sound cruel instead of explosive. "You people used to understand discretion," he muttered while glancing directly at Monica. "Now anyone can buy access." The words spread through the cabin like poison. A young black flight attendant near the galley froze instantly. Her jaw tightened, but she stayed silent. Years of corporate survival had trained employees exactly when not to speak. Across the aisle, the passenger recording on his phone zoomed in closer. Millions of people online would eventually replay this exact moment frame by frame. But nobody on board knew that yet. Monica slowly turned her head toward Richard. No anger. No trembling. Just exhaustion so deep it almost looked peaceful. "You think dignity is something your money invented," she said softly. Richard smirked. "No, money simply protects it." Monica held his stare for a long moment. Then she asked the question that quietly shattered him before he even realized it. "And what protected yours before you had money?" Richard's expression faltered. Briefly. Barely. But Monica saw it. Powerful men often mistook interruption for victory. They never expected someone to see through them completely. Ashley stepped forward quickly, trying to regain control. "Ma'am, I need to ask you one final time to cooperate." "Cooperate with what?" Monica replied. "His discomfort?" Ashley opened her mouth, but the cockpit door suddenly unlocked behind her with a sharp metallic click. The sound cut through the cabin like a gunshot. Captain Daniel Brooks stepped out wearing his Navy pilot uniform, his face unusually tense. The moment Ashley saw him, relief crossed her face. She assumed he came to support removing Monica from first class before departure. Richard smiled confidently too. "Captain," he said loudly, "finally. Perhaps you can restore some standards around here." But Daniel didn't even look at him. His eyes locked directly onto Monica Hayes instead. And the second he recognized her face in person, the color visibly drained from his own. Every flight attendant noticed it immediately. Daniel straightened his posture instinctively. "Ma'am," he said carefully, almost breathless now, "I'm very sorry for the delay." The cabin fell silent again. Because suddenly, the pilot sounded nervous. Nervous around her. Captain Daniel Brooks had spent 14 years in aviation, and in all that time, he had learned one rule above everything else. When powerful people stayed quiet during humiliation, it usually meant they possessed a kind of power louder than everyone else in the room combined. The first-class cabin watched him carefully now. Flight attendants straightened their posture instinctively. Ashley Monroe suddenly looked uncertain for the first time that evening. Richard Whitmore, meanwhile, smiled with renewed confidence, convinced the captain had arrived to solve his problem. "Captain," Richard said smoothly, gesturing toward Monica without even looking directly at her, "I'm glad someone here still understands customer standards." Daniel ignored him completely. His eyes remained fixed on Monica Hayes. Even standing in the aisle, wearing a simple black hoodie beneath the cabin lights, she carried herself with the terrifying calm of someone accustomed to controlling outcomes long before other people even recognized the game had started. Daniel swallowed carefully. "Ms. Hayes," he said respectfully, "I wasn't informed you would be on board tonight." That sentence changed the oxygen inside the cabin. Ashley blinked hard. Richard's smile faded slightly. A businessman near the window slowly lowered his newspaper. Monica looked up at the captain with the same composed expression she'd maintained since boarding. "Clearly," she replied softly, "a lot of people weren't informed." A few passengers looked down immediately after she said it. Shame had finally entered the room. Richard frowned. "Wait," he interrupted sharply. "You know her?" Daniel finally turned toward him, though his face had lost every trace of friendliness now. "Sir," he answered carefully, "I know exactly who she is." Silence crashed over first class again. Ashley's face drained pale. Her eyes flickered quickly between Monica and the captain as pieces began assembling in her mind too late. But Richard Whitmore still hadn't caught up. Men like him rarely imagined a woman they looked down on could secretly outrank them. "Then perhaps," Richard said coldly, "you can explain why she's creating disruption before departure." Monica almost smiled at that. Almost. Daniel stared at Richard for a long second before speaking again. "The disruption," he said evenly, "began before Ms. Hayes ever responded." Ashley shifted nervously beside the galley wall. "Captain, we were only trying to protect the onboard experience." Daniel's expression hardened instantly. "For who?" he asked. The exact same question Monica had asked earlier. Ashley had no answer now either. 3 rows behind them, the passenger recording everything tilted his phone slightly higher as whispers quietly spread across the cabin. One woman searched Monica's name online beneath her blanket. The second the search results appeared, her eyes widened in complete disbelief. Founder of Hayes Aeronautics Systems. Majority stakeholder in Crown Atlantic Airways. Net worth, $4.8 billion. She looked back toward Monica like she was suddenly seeing a completely different human being. But Monica herself hadn't changed at all. That was the uncomfortable truth. The only thing changing now was everyone else. Richard laughed once under his breath, though it sounded weaker than before. "Come on," he scoffed. "You expect me to believe this woman owns part of the airline?" Monica slowly turned her head toward him again. "Not part," she said quietly. "Enough." The words landed heavier than shouting ever could. Daniel exhaled carefully, already anticipating the disaster waiting to explode once this incident reached corporate servers. Because by now it already had. The live stream had crossed 70,000 viewers before pushback. Employees inside Crown Atlantic headquarters were watching clips spread across internal channels in real time. One executive assistant had already contacted operations control. Another had alerted legal. And at that exact moment, inside the cockpit behind Daniel, a secure company notification flashed red across the flight terminal monitor. Executive Priority Protocol initiated. Do not depart. The notification reached Crown Atlantic headquarters in Manhattan before most passengers in first class even understood what was happening. Inside the airline's Executive Operations Center, screens began lighting up one after another as the live stream spread across internal employee channels. "Is that Monica Hayes?" someone whispered near the compliance desk. Nobody answered immediately. They were too busy watching the footage from Flight 908 in stunned silence. Richard Whitmore's voice echoed through the phone speakers inside the room. People like her always forced their way into spaces they didn't earn. Several employees looked physically sick hearing it. One senior operations manager stood up, so fast his chair rolled backward into the wall. "Activate executive review," he ordered instantly. "Right now." Back on board the aircraft. However, Monica remained completely still beside the window. Rain streaked softly across the glass beside her. Outside, runway lights blurred into glowing rivers beneath the stormy night sky. Inside the cabin, panic was beginning to spread quietly beneath polished smiles and tailored suits. Ashley Monroe's hands trembled slightly now as she adjusted the scarf around her neck. She could feel the atmosphere collapsing around her in real time. A few passengers who had laughed earlier no longer looked comfortable. One man suddenly became fascinated with his untouched dessert plate. Another quietly removed his headphones after realizing the entire situation had become far more serious than casual public humiliation. Richard Whitmore still refused to see it. "This is ridiculous," he snapped toward Captain Brooks. "We are delaying an international departure over hurt feelings?" Daniel's jaw tightened instantly. "No, sir," he answered carefully. "We are delaying because company leadership has initiated review protocols." Richard blinked. "Leadership?" Daniel held his stare. "Yes, sir." For the first time that night, uncertainty appeared behind Richard's arrogance. Small, fragile, but unmistakable. Monica noticed it immediately. Fear always entered powerful people the same way. Quietly, like cold air through a cracked window. Across the aisle, the little black girl who had been watching everything leaned gently toward her mother. "Mom," she whispered softly, "is that lady important?" Her mother hesitated before answering. Then she looked directly at Monica. "Very," she said quietly. The child stared at Monica with wide eyes after that. Not because of the money, not because of ownership, but because Monica looked calm in a room that had tried to humiliate her publicly. That kind of composure felt almost supernatural. And suddenly, without warning, Monica drifted backward into a memory she hadn't visited in years. Atlanta. Summer heat. Age 11. She sat beside her mother inside another airport terminal while wealthy white passengers stared at them the exact same way Richard Whitmore had stared tonight. Her mother wore a navy business suit and carried a first-class boarding pass in shaking hands after working 3 jobs to afford that ticket. But before boarding even began, a gate agent pulled her aside publicly. "Ma'am," the woman said back then, "first-class passengers use a different line." Monica remembered the humiliation on her mother's face. Not anger. Worse, embarrassment. Like she had been caught trespassing inside someone else's dream. Monica never forgot what her mother whispered afterward while holding back tears near the gate window. "Baby, sometimes people see our skin before they see our humanity." That sentence built something inside Monica that never stopped growing. Years later, she founded Hayes Aeronautics with one obsession buried deep beneath every business decision. No black child should ever watch their parents shrink themselves to survive public disrespect again. Back in the present, Monica slowly exhaled and returned her eyes toward the rain outside. Richard noticed the shift in her expression and mistook reflection for weakness. "Look," he muttered coldly. "Whatever game this is, I'm done entertaining it." Monica finally turned toward him one last time. Her voice stayed soft, controlled, but now there was something heavier beneath it, something ancient. "This stopped being a game," she said quietly, "the moment you confused privilege with ownership." And at that exact second, every flight attendant's company tablet inside first class simultaneously flashed the same red notification across their screens. Executive Directive. Remove INO passenger from seat 1A. The moment the red directive appeared across every crew tablet, the balance of power inside first class shattered completely. Ashley Monroe stared at the glowing screen in her trembling hands, as though it might somehow change if she blinked enough times. Executive Directive. Remove no passenger from seat 1A. Beneath it sat a second line that made her pulse collapse into panic. Internal compliance review initiated. Ashley slowly looked up at Monica Hayes again, and this time she no longer saw a casually dressed black woman in a hoodie. She saw danger. Corporate danger. Career-ending danger. Around the cabin, the atmosphere turned electric. Passengers exchanged silent glances over champagne glasses and folded blankets. The businessman recording near the aisle could barely steady his phone anymore. Comments were flooding his livestream faster than he could read them. "Oh my God, that's Monica Hayes, the airline owner? Fire that crew immediately." Richard Whitmore still sat frozen beside Monica, trying desperately to maintain the authority he had worn so confidently only minutes earlier. But arrogance depended heavily on control, and control was evaporating from him second by second. "This is insane," he snapped finally, though his voice cracked slightly now. "You're seriously disrupting an international flight over social media outrage." Captain Daniel Brooks didn't move. "No, sir," he replied evenly. "We are responding to executive command." Richard laughed bitterly. "Executive command from who?" Nobody answered immediately. They didn't need to. Monica slowly crossed one leg over the other, her eyes resting calmly on the runway outside, while rain continued sliding down the window beside her like silver tears. That silence terrified Richard more than yelling ever could, because deep down, he was beginning to realize something horrifying. The woman he tried to remove from first class never once needed permission to stay there. Ashley swallowed hard and stepped closer to Monica carefully now, her earlier confidence completely gone. "Ms. Hayes," she began quietly, "I sincerely apologize if there's been any misunderstanding tonight." Monica looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "Misunderstanding?" she repeated softly. Ashley's throat tightened instantly, because now she heard it too. The problem had never been confusion. It had been assumption. Monica glanced briefly toward the little black girl sitting 3 rows behind them. The child was still watching her carefully, almost like she was witnessing history without fully understanding why. Monica remembered that feeling. Watching adults decide your worth before hearing your voice. Watching rooms become colder the moment you entered them. Watching dignity become negotiable depending on skin tone. Richard suddenly stood up from his seat in frustration. "Enough," he barked. "I know board members personally. I'll call them myself." But the moment he reached for his phone, his expression changed instantly. No signal. The aircraft network had already restricted outbound communications from first-class devices pending executive review. Daniel noticed the panic flash across Richard's face. "Sir," the captain said carefully, "please remain seated." Richard turned toward him in disbelief. "Are you threatening me?" Daniel held his gaze. "No, sir. I'm protecting this flight." Across the cabin, whispers intensified. Passengers who had stayed silent earlier now looked openly embarrassed. One older woman finally shook her head and muttered under her breath. All this because she was black. Monica heard it. So did everyone else. And suddenly the truth no longer hid beneath politeness or corporate language. It sat fully exposed in the center of first class where nobody could pretend anymore. Richard looked around the cabin desperately now, searching for support that no longer existed. But public cruelty only survives while witnesses stay comfortable. And comfort had disappeared. Then Monica finally rose slowly from seat 1A. No dramatic movement. No anger. Just quiet authority filling the cabin, so completely even the rain outside seemed to pause with her. She looked directly at Richard Whitmore and spoke the sentence that would follow him for the rest of his life. "You thought I was sitting in your world," she said calmly. "You never realized you were already sitting in mine." Richard Whitmore had spent decades mastering the art of controlling rooms. Boardrooms, fundraisers, political dinners, luxury resorts where people laughed too quickly at his jokes because his approval could move markets by morning. But standing inside first class that night, surrounded by passengers now staring at him with quiet disgust, he experienced something unfamiliar for the very first time in years. Irrelevance. Monica Hayes remained standing beside seat 1A, calm as ever, while Richard struggled to breathe evenly through the humiliation tightening around his throat. Her sentence still echoed through the cabin like smoke after fire. "You were already sitting in mine." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even Ashley Monroe seemed frozen beside the galley, clutching her crew tablet like it might somehow save her career. The livestream had crossed 2 million views. Inside Crown Atlantic headquarters, executives, legal teams, and communications officers were now fully assembled in the operations center, watching every second unfold in real time. One junior analyst whispered. She never even raised her voice. And somehow, that made the moment more devastating. Richard forced out a laugh that sounded hollow even to himself. "So what?" he snapped. "You expect everyone to bow because you own stock?" Monica tilted her head slightly. "No," she answered softly. "I expect human beings to recognize humanity before hierarchy." The sentence landed harder than any insult could have, because deep down, everyone in that cabin understood she was right. Richard's face darkened. "Don't lecture me," he hissed. "I built my empire from nothing." Monica looked at him carefully then. Not angry, not impressed either, just tired. "No," she said quietly. "You built comfort around yourself and mistook it for character." A sharp silence followed. Across the aisle, one passenger slowly lowered his eyes in shame. Another finally stopped recording altogether, realizing this had transformed into something bigger than viral entertainment. It wasn't just about one racist billionaire anymore. It was about every moment powerful people weaponized belonging against those they decided looked out of place. Captain Daniel Brooks stepped forward slightly. "Mr. Whitmore," he said carefully, "corporate has issued direct instruction regarding tonight's incident." Richard turned sharply. "What instruction?" Daniel hesitated briefly before answering. "You are being formally documented for discriminatory conduct toward executive leadership on board this aircraft." Richard stared at him in disbelief. "Executive leadership?" Daniel nodded once toward Monica. "Yes, sir." Ashley visibly shut her eyes for a second after hearing it spoken aloud officially. The title changed everything. Not because Monica suddenly became worthy of respect. She always was. But because now the people around her finally had language they considered important enough to acknowledge her value. Monica noticed that too. And somehow, that disappointed her more than Richard himself. 3 rows back, the little black girl continued staring at Monica with wide, thoughtful eyes. Her mother leaned closer and whispered something softly into her ear. The child smiled after hearing it. A small smile, but real. Monica saw that and felt something loosen quietly inside her chest for the first time that night. Not victory, something gentler, maybe relief. Richard suddenly grabbed his jacket aggressively from the seat beside him. "This is absurd," he muttered. "I'll have this airline dragged through court." Monica nodded slowly. "You can try." Then she stepped slightly closer, close enough now that Richard finally understood why calm people were often the most dangerous people in any room. Because they had already conquered themselves first. Monica's voice remained low, controlled, but every word cut cleanly through the silence around them. "You looked at a black woman in first class," she said, "and your first instinct was removal." Richard opened his mouth, but no words came out this time. Monica continued. "Not conversation, not curiosity, removal." The cabin stayed motionless around her. "That instinct," she finished softly, "is the reason people like me had to build our own tables instead of waiting for seats at yours." And for the first time all night, Richard Whitmore looked small. By the time the cabin doors finally closed again, nobody inside first class remembered the delay anymore. They only remembered the silence. The unbearable, suffocating silence that followed Monica Hayes's final words to Richard Whitmore. The billionaire stood motionless beside his seat now, clutching his expensive jacket with the stiff posture of a man realizing money could no longer protect him from public truth. Around him, passengers avoided eye contact the way people do after witnessing something deeply shameful. Ashley Monroe's company tablet vibrated again in her hands. This time the notification came directly from Crown Atlantic Executive Compliance. Crew access under temporary review. Report to Internal Affairs upon arrival. Ashley's face drained completely. She looked toward Monica with glossy eyes, searching desperately for some sign of mercy. Monica gave none. Not cruelty either. Just consequence. That was the difference. Revenge screams. Consequence arrives quietly. Captain Daniel Brooks stepped toward the center aisle and adjusted his uniform jacket carefully before speaking. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced evenly. Departure has been temporarily delayed while we complete executive protocol procedures. Nobody complained. Not a single passenger. Because now the entire cabin understood this was no longer about inconvenience. It was about exposure. Richard finally snapped under the pressure. This is insanity, he barked loudly. You're humiliating me over one misunderstanding. Monica slowly turned toward him again. No, she replied calmly. Your humiliation began the moment you confused prejudice with authority. The words cut through him instantly. Richard looked around the cabin searching for support, but all he found were lowered eyes, uncomfortable faces, and glowing phone screens documenting the collapse of his image in real time. Online, the livestream had exploded past 6 million views. News accounts were reposting clips before the plane had even left the gate. Headlines were already forming across social media. Billionaire demands black woman removed from first class. Then learns she owns the airline. Inside Crown Atlantic headquarters, legal advisors exchanged grim looks while public relations teams drafted emergency statements. But Monica still hadn't touched her phone once. That unnerved people the most. She didn't need to control the narrative anymore. Truth was already doing it for her. 2 airport security officers quietly boarded the aircraft moments later after receiving direct instruction from operations control. The taller officer approached Captain Brooks first, listened carefully, then nodded once before turning toward Richard. Sir, he said professionally, we need to speak with you outside the cabin. Richard stared at him in disbelief. Excuse me. This is regarding a conduct complaint filed during boarding procedures. Richard laughed angrily. You cannot be serious. The second officer remained expressionless. Sir, please collect your belongings. A ripple moved through first class. Nobody expected it to go this far. But Monica did. Because she understood something most people never learned. Systems only move quickly when powerful people finally become the target of the behavior others endured quietly for years. Richard looked toward Monica one final time, desperate now. You're really doing this? He asked bitterly. Monica met his eyes without flinching. No, she answered softly. You did. The officers escorted him slowly toward the exit while cameras followed every step. The billionaire who once believed the cabin belonged to him walked out under complete silence. No applause. No dramatic cheering. Somehow that silence felt far heavier. Ashley lowered her eyes as Richard disappeared beyond the aircraft door. Then she whispered carefully toward Monica. I truly am sorry. Monica studied her for a long second before replying. I hope you remember this feeling the next time someone walks on board dressed differently than you expected. Ashley nodded silently, tears forming now. Outside, rain continued falling across the runway lights like liquid silver beneath the night sky. Inside the cabin, something invisible had shifted permanently. Not just power, perspective. And as Monica slowly returned to seat 1A, the little black girl 3 rows back smiled at her openly this time. Monica smiled back. 23 minutes after the confrontation began, Crown Atlantic Flight 908 finally pushed back from the gate. Outside the aircraft windows, rain rolled across the runway in silver streaks beneath the midnight lights of JFK Airport. The engines hummed softly now, steady and controlled, as if the aircraft itself had been holding its breath the entire night. Inside first class, nobody spoke much anymore. The earlier arrogance, the nervous laughter, the whispered assumptions, all of it had vanished somewhere between Richard Whitmore being escorted off the plane and Monica Hayes quietly returning to seat 1A. The cabin felt different now. Smaller somehow. More honest. Monica rested beside the window with her hands folded calmly in her lap, watching the blurred airport lights drift slowly past as the aircraft taxied toward the runway. She looked exactly the same as when she boarded. Same black hoodie, same quiet posture, same composed expression. But now everyone around her saw her differently, and that realization carried its own uncomfortable weight. Across the aisle, passengers avoided staring too long. Shame had a way of softening people's movements. Even Ashley Monroe moved carefully now while collecting untouched glasses from tray tables, her earlier confidence replaced with silent reflection. Near the back of first class, the little black girl still couldn't stop glancing toward Monica every few seconds. Finally, after gathering enough courage, the child stood and slowly walked forward beside her mother. "Excuse me," the girl whispered softly once she reached Monica's seat. Monica turned immediately, her expression gentle for the first time all night. "Yes." The little girl hesitated. "Are you really the owner?" A few nearby passengers looked over quietly, pretending not to listen. Monica smiled faintly. "One of them," she answered. The child's eyes widened. "Did you get scared?" That question lingered in the air longer than anyone expected. Monica looked at the girl carefully before answering. Then she glanced briefly around the silent cabin surrounding them. "Yes," she said honestly. "But courage isn't about never being scared." The girl listened closely. Monica continued softly. "It's about refusing to disappear because someone else is uncomfortable with your presence." The child nodded slowly like she would remember that sentence for the rest of her life. Her mother quietly thanked Monica before guiding her back to their seats. Captain Daniel Brooks's voice finally came over the intercom moments later. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience tonight. We are now cleared for departure to Dubai." The aircraft began turning slowly toward the runway. Beyond the window, the city lights stretched endlessly against the darkness like constellations built by human hands. Monica leaned back gently into her seat as the engines deepened beneath the cabin floor. Across social media, the video had already spread into millions of homes around the world. Comment sections overflowed with outrage, support, debate, confession. Some people defended Richard. Many condemned him. But buried beneath all the noise was something more important. Millions of people were finally discussing the quiet violence of assumption. The kind dressed in politeness. The kind hidden beneath phrases like standards, professionalism, and belonging. Monica closed her eyes briefly as the aircraft accelerated down the runway. She thought about her mother standing humiliated in that airport decades ago. She thought about the little girl watching tonight from row 4. And she thought about how many black people spent their entire lives shrinking themselves just to survive rooms built to question their existence. Then the aircraft lifted into the storm-dark sky. Smooth, powerful, unstoppable. And as New York disappeared beneath the clouds, the narrator's voice settled quietly over the moment like final truth. The most powerful person on that plane was never the loudest one in the room. She was the woman who stayed seated while the world finally stood corrected.